The first storyteller is an old friend of mine. He makes a terrific fish chowder. He's a bit of a chowder himself, a man of many parts. Along with his cooking skills, he's been a farmer, tugboat captain, a schemer, a sailor, a sailing ship captain. He's run day tours out of Belfast Harbor. He's been a bosun on oil tankers. He can survey your boat and fix your Volvo. He and his wife Julie have raised 2 spectacular children. He and I first sailed together on the Christina. He was an engineer and I was the mate. He kept that ancient tugboat running all the way to Honduras and back. Welcome, Stephen Olson. Well, I got some counseling on what kind of a story to tell. I was planning on telling about the night when Rick Cronin and I both got seasick for the first time in our lives. It was a colorful tale involving going around Cape Hatteras in January, and the highlight was a geyser of sewage shooting out of the head. And my wife suggested that maybe I should tell you a different story. So I'm going to do that. I'm not going to tell you the story about going by Cape Hatteras on the Christina on Christmas Eve in terrible weather with Rick Cronin, because he was a circus juggler at one point, juggling 2 oranges and an apple while the boat just rolled like a barrel. Anyway, this is a story about 1991 in April when I was sailing as bosun. I had just been appointed bosun on an beautiful old steam tanker called the King. And I won't describe it beyond that, but we were headed south from New York Harbor. I had just unloaded 6 million gallons of gasoline, and I was getting used to, you know, my life. She was the first ship I ever worked on, sailing as an able-bodied seaman. And she was an incredibly hard-working ship. One trip I was on for 142 days, and during that time she was either underway or working cargo for 141 of them. And I know, and 142 days, I was not capable of going longer. I started talking to myself. And she was an old-fashioned ship with all of the dock lines were 600-foot fiber dock lines. They did not roll up neatly on drums. They were dragged down the deck and coiled down by hand, and she was what's called a product carrier or a clean oil tanker, and we would switch from cargo to cargo. And on this particular trip, we had just unloaded heating oil, and it was right during the desert storm, and we were in theory under charter to go down to Baton Rouge and load a cargo of military, what was called moon fuel, which was the fuel that the very high altitude surveillance planes could burn at like 60,000 feet. And the amount of cleaning that had to go into these tanks to get them ready for a cargo of moon fuel was fairly extensive. And so we went through the whole process of getting unhooked from our cargo lines, getting the manifold closed off, getting the dock lines in, getting the tugboats made up alongside, all of this stuff preparatory to actually getting underway. And these old ships, the King, when she came out, sailed with a crew of 50, and there were 26 of us on board. And so when they tell you about how hard they used to work in the old days, well, I don't know what they were working at, but anyway, we got out in the ocean, headed south, and the next day my normal day would be at 6 in the morning. I'd go up to the wheelhouse and have a cup of coffee with the chief mate, who is my boss. He's the king of the deck, and he's never called the chief mate, he's just called the mate. And because he's the guy that everybody, all the deck revolves around. So we were talking, he says, okay, well, after breakfast, get set up to blow tanks, which is a question of all these steam hoses hooked into our steam system, because this is actually a steamship. She wasn't a diesel. And then we would take plates up off the deck, and which all had to be done by hand because the ship was still full of vapor, and a spark from a power tool could have blown the decks off the ship. And so we got that going, and these blowers you set down and they just howl like banshees, and they're blowing down some of these deck plates that you take off, and other deck plates are just pouring fuel vapors out on deck and over the rails and away. And we're getting ready to and then when you do, this ship had 27 tanks, and so every one you had to open covers and then move these blowers and sit there with a cargo monitor until they were showing that they were free of vapor, and then we'd move to the next tank. And we get this done. The mate comes and says, all right, you get that done, start getting the gear out for washing tanks, which is hundreds and hundreds of feet of fire hose, which you hooked into the hot water system on deck, and then these things that are giant rotating spray heads that you would then drop down through these open manholes, and they'd go down 10 feet for 20 minutes and then 30 feet for 40 minutes. And it was all this huge book about cleaning the tanks, telling you where to drop these machines down. And then you'd have to pull them back, and they're it was a lot of work and a lot of heat between the steam hoses and the hot water. And I said to the mate, we got the blowers going, everything's fine. We got 4 days to clean tanks. Maybe we could just blow tanks today. And I can stay out on deck, and I just need a couple of guys to help me move blowers once an hour. The rest of the time we can just take the day off. And he just looked at me and he said, what? And I said, mate, we went into New Jersey on Christmas Eve, tied up at 10 o'clock, worked cargo all night. Santa flew right over us. And the next day, we were empty and underway again at 10 o'clock on Christmas night. And nobody got a moment off. And here it is, it's Easter. And he just looks at me and he goes, Easter? And I said, yeah, it's Easter. And he goes, well, I said, the guys are tired. And he just looked at him and he was just like totally blank on that idea, because chief mates are never tired. Chief mates, they are like a breed apart. They want to be captains, and they will walk through fire to become captains, and the fire is being chief mate and carrying the whole ship around on your back. And he just looks at me and he goes, friggin' Easter? And I said, yeah, we could take the day off, kind of. Not really, but part of the day off. And at this time, we had kind of gotten in along because we were going south. The Gulf Stream is coming north, and we were working our way south on the inside, up on the continental shelf, and the Gulf Stream spins off these eddies, warm core eddies going up on the shelf, and then the cold water from the shelf coming out in the stream. And so the second mate was up in the wheelhouse kind of steering us around to catch these eddies, which would give us a little boost in speed. And the King was a wonderful ship, but she was not exactly a speed burner. And a 2-knot current was a big deal. And so one of the things about the edge of the Gulf Stream is that they're just thunderheads. You know, you can tell where the edge of the stream is just because of a line of rain squalls and thunderstorms. And we're going along, and the mate's looking at me going, I can't believe it. I hired you as bosun and you want to give everybody the day off. He goes, Easter. And I said, mate, yeah, Easter. And at the exact moment, the ship was struck by lightning. And it was not hit like something across the valley that you see. It was like, and we're both sitting there looking at each other, and we're both perfectly aware that these blowers are just piling fuel vapors up out of the hatches. And we look up, we were up on the foredeck, and we look up at the wheelhouse, and the second mate and the captain are looking down at us. And I'm looking at the mate, and in that moment I saw exactly what he looked like when he was 7 years old. His face was just a blank, and I'm sitting there going, oh man, I do not want to die. And we're going along, and the seconds rolled by, and it became apparent we're not going to die. The ship is not going to blow up. And he just looks at me, and he goes, Easter, huh? And I said, yeah. And he said, all right, keep the pumps running. It was about 25 years ago. Phone rang at about 9:30 at night, and there was a guy that I'd never talked to before in my life named Francis Farrell, wanting to know if I had some time and was interested in a job. And I said, well, I have some time. What job? And he said, well, what are you doing tomorrow? And I said, I don't know. And he said, I need you to take a tugboat to from Portsmouth to Connecticut. And I said, okay. And so at 11 o'clock the next morning I was there. Francis Farrell was not, but his captain was, and the captain looked at me. I'm looking around this 123-foot tugboat, and he says, do you drink coffee? And I said, no. Well, yeah, I drink some. And he goes, you smoke cigarettes? And I said, no. He said, that's too bad. And I said, why? He said, with these boats, you got to take it slow. Everything goes slow. This is a big, heavy boat. She moves slow. You can't be in a hurry. You can't be jerking on the controls. He said, in fact, there are no controls. And I looked around the wheelhouse, and he was right. There were no controls except for the wheel. And I'm kind of looking at this, and he goes, yeah. He goes, everything's done down the engine room. And you talk to him with these things. And he goes over by the door, and there's two brass handles, a little one and a big one. And he said, this is the jingle. That's the bell. And I go, great. And he goes, when you want to go ahead, you pull on the bell, one bell. And then you go ahead. And I said, okay, I got that. How do you get it to stop? And he said, you pull it again, one bell, and it stops. And I said, so how does that work? And he said, well, if you're going ahead and you pull the bell, then it stops. And if you're stopped, if you pull the bell, it goes forward. And I said, how do you go backwards? And he said, well, you pull the bell till you stop. If you're going ahead, you pull the bell to stop, and then you pull it twice, and then you go astern. And I said, well, then how do you stop it? He said, you pull it once. And I kind of, okay. And he said, if you're going ahead and you want to go astern, the best thing to do is to pull it once and they stop, and then pull it twice and they go astern. But you can also pull it just 4 times and they go astern. but you shouldn't do that. And I said, why not? And he said, well, because the engineers figure you're getting in trouble up there and trying to get yourself out of trouble by making rapid shifts, and they get nervous. I said, okay, we got that. I said, how do you go faster and slower? And he goes, that's what the jingle is for. One jingle is half ahead, two jingles is full ahead. And I said, how do you slow down? And he said, well, if you're going ahead, you pull one bell and you get slow ahead. And I said, I thought I'd get stop. And he said, no, because you've given it a jingle. And so I'm looking at this guy and going, and he goes, listen, I gotta go. It was a very snowy day. He says, I gotta drive all the way down to Rhode Island, then I gotta be on an airplane tomorrow to go to work. And I said, where? And he said, Puerto Rico. I drive a tug between Canaveral and Puerto Rico. I just do this for fun. And I'm kind of going, yeah, this looks like a lot of fun. And so he says, yeah, well, how are you going to get off of here? And I said, well, you know, and I said, well, I guess we'll put this line across the front end of the barge, because we were made up on the hip of the barge, tied alongside it. And everything was ready to go, because he had been planning to do the trip when the weather went bad. And so I said, well, we'll do this, we'll do that. And he said, fine, you got it, you're going to do great. And so I'm there, and so he basically just walks out, and I'm looking around the wheelhouse, and the deckhands had gone out on it, because he was going to throw the lines off for us, the off-going captain, and the deckhands go out with him. And they're standing there in typical deckhand on a snowy day position, with their back to the snow, with their back to the wind. They look like a couple of sheep. And so I'm going, well, there must be engineers down there. And I go over to the bell, and he had told me to do this. I jingle it. And I wait for a minute, and it jingles back. Whoa. And so, you know, this tug was built in like 1942, and they originally had this beautiful wheel, but nobody ever uses them anymore. It's just a little jog lever, a little looks like, I don't know what it looks like. It's a little piece of industrial wiring. You go like that, and so I put it over this way a little bit, and wait a minute. This is the tug Ocean King alongside Portsmouth Naval Yard, ready to get underway with a barge going downriver bound for sea. Tug Ocean King standing by in 1613, tug Ocean King. Okay, done that. And I go back over to this thing. So they've given me a jingle telling me they're ready. Bang! This is a what's called a Fairbanks Morse opposed piston engine. It is a massive piece of equipment. I've seen them since. And the whole tug just kind of tips a little bit in reaction to the torque reaction to the propeller turning. And we push ahead, and the barge folds in just the way we were hoping. The line up in front goes slack. The captain lifts it off. Hey, this is working great. Bong! And it stops. And there you have never heard more intimidating silence than when you're maneuvering a boat and the engine is off. All there is this of the generator, you know, it's seemingly in another county. And so I waited for a little while, and sure enough, the tide lifted it off, and the captain walked back to the stern where our other line was up, and everything was going quite well. And so I bong, and it pushed ahead, and the line went slack, and the captain picked it off and threw it down on the barge. Barge turned around. We went downriver. It was like magic. One of the best moments of my life.